President Muhammadu Buhari has given the go-ahead for a further reopening of the Nigerian economy, with the tourism and the aviation sectors, two of the worst hits by the COVID-19 pandemic, now presented with another opportunity to reposition for optimal performance. Now, local flights will resume on June 21st, while religious organizations have also been asked to carry on and regroup. But one critical aspect of national life which will remain closed for now are schools. In submitting its reports to President Muhammadu Buhari last weekend, the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 says that states can take charge of reopening of schools and businesses depending on the peculiarity of the pandemic situation in each state. Are these states in a better position to take charge? Won't it be subjected to politics? And what could be the benefits of having the states take charge of this process? Well, joining us now to discuss all of this is Professor Auwalu Yadudu, Professor of Law and current Vice Chancellor at the Federal University of Benin and Kebbi, Nigeria. Welcome to the program. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning, Prof.
Very good morning to you. I did make a correction that I'm not a Vice Chancellor of the university. I was appointed, but didn't pick up the job.
Okay, my apologies.
So I'm a professor of law here in Kano.
Okay, well, Prof, let's talk about COVID-19 and the steps taken so far by the federal government and the state governments. Now we have the federal government saying that places of religious worship can reopen. There's also been a tinkering with the curfew in terms of movement restriction. What's your assessment of how the federal government and the state governments have handled the situation so far? You are in Kano. Particularly, would like to tell you to tell us your assessment of the situation in Kano.
Well, you see, the decision to lock down, it's a very, very difficult decision. One informed by the science and also what is obtained on the ground. But when to reopen also is a very difficult decision. It has to take so many things into account. Now, the fact that the federal government now has asked or left the matter in the hands of local authorities, I think it should not be too strange. The control, the follow-up, the handling, the testing, everything about infectious disease is a local matter. You cannot have the federal authority, a centralized authority, deciding, micromanaging matters like this. Now, one has to say this, but of course, then you have a problem in Nigeria where the states initially appeared to be in denial. Some continue to be in denial that there is such a thing happening, and that there is a lot of politics involved also in handling the crisis. So, yes, there will be the political consideration that localities will take into account, but the pressure on the authorities is overwhelming, and I think they may have made the decision based on the information available to them, based on the data available to them, that perhaps under certain conditions, they can ease things up. And I think it is right that it is local authorities. By local authorities, I mean the states that should make the call, not the federal government, which does not know actually, as a matter of fact, the details of what is happening on the grounds in states.
Thank you, sir. In your opinion, is there a case for reopening schools? As we've seen in Europe, you've seen it in France and the United Kingdom, some children have returned to school. Should that be the case here?
I'm not an epidemiologist, and nor am I a physician. But from what we hear, although on the one hand, this pandemic, the coronavirus does not impact as heavily or as disastrously on children or people below the age of 50 or 60 as it does on those 60 and above who have pre-existing condition. Although this is the fact, but if you reopen schools, you are really creating a wider cycle for community infection, and the children you're exposing also the children and their parents and their grandparents, because we have a very, very local way of living. The father, the mother, the grandfather, the grandparents tend to live, whether in cities or in rural areas, with their children. So I think the risk of deterioration in community infection would be high, and therefore, based on the fact and the data, which I do not have available, but I think one can say it is a bit too early. It will be well to try to see how this works out. I mean, the relaxation of the lockdown in these other areas, and then maybe decide to reopen schools later, based on the information data available to those who take such decisions.
Certainly, Professor. Now, one interesting fact that came out of the Presidential Task Force briefing yesterday when we heard all of this was the fact that 20 out of 774 local governments account for the majority of COVID-19 cases in the country, 60% of COVID-19 cases. Now, based on this fact, what do you think that tells us about the method in which government should adopt when trying to fight this virus? Like, in terms of whether this should be at the hands of states, local governments, and they should have more autonomy in terms of decision-making. What do you think this tells us? 20 out of 774 LGAs holding the most of COVID-19 in Nigeria right now.
Well, Nigeria is not unique in this. I think the world over, the tendency for the devastation and the spread and the impact has tended to be very, very concentrated, whether it is in the US or in Europe, and not surprisingly also here in Nigeria. With this information, with the tracking and with the tracing and with a lot of intelligence and footwork put in this, one can be able to maybe decide when to reopen schools based on the information, so that maybe you might reopen schools in areas that are not as devastated or affected earlier than you would do in other areas. But of course, as I said, if you permit me, this is really a decision that should be informed and informed by the science and the facts and the data on the ground, which I think individuals like you and I may not be possessed of. But I think they have to be very careful. And with this information, they should be guided on how to proceed further, not just to say, do open school all over the country, but take into account that the majority of the cases are in certain areas, and therefore avoid those areas. I mean, it's an obvious thing to do.
Well, just by way of information, I mean, the NCDC already disclosed that 11 of those 20 local governments are in Lagos, and then the rest are mostly in Kano State. But I would like to ask you this question about federalism. When you said earlier on that it made sense for the federal government to allow local authorities, the states that is, to take a decision about reopening of schools or places of religious worship, you said, well, that's what they should do. But is this an indication that the federal government is now embracing federalism? Is this about federalism or just expediency? But we'll take a short break, Professor Yadudu. When we return, I would like to take your response. We'll be right back. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Still with us is Professor Auwalu Yadudu, Professor of Law. Professor Yadudu, I had asked you a question whether the recognition of the rights of states and local councils means that the federal government is now moving in the direction of federalism, as opposed to the complaints about unitarism that we have seen.
Well, I'm happy you said the complaint of unitarism. I think what the federal government has done is not something new or sudden or about time. I think it is a realism. This is a matter when a federal action was needed, a centralized federal decision was needed, it was taken. For example, at the start of the infection, the federal government made a determination that Lagos and Ogun State were the hotspots, and they needed to take a decision in invoking an existing act of the National Assembly, and they acted, and then they later extended it to Kano by way of a centralized lockdown and decisions on movement and other things. Now, the fact of the matter is that this is something which is very, very local. Local in its spread, it is in its impact. Of course, on the economy, it tends to be national, and also on the psyche and the behavior. But I think I don't see the federal government making a U-turn, being more responsive to the need for federalism now than it has before. I think it's realism, I would say.
So this is a flash in the pan then. Earlier on in the show, we were talking to Professor Ogunyemi, who chairs ASU. I wanted to ask you an ASU-related question. Now, they have advised their members not to participate in e-learning and not to submit lecture notes. And because, as they call it, it's a wild goose chase. All attempts to get the requisite infrastructure for universities have failed, so now they do not want to be called upon at this time when homeschooling and online learning is no longer some kind of esoteric practice. It's what everybody is doing, everybody who can do it. I would like your comments on that and your comments on the fate or the lot of those whose parents cannot provide the hardware or the data or any other infrastructure that's necessary for homeschooling.
I think I hate to disagree with the chairman of the ASU. I think the new normal is such that you cannot do things as you did before. Things have changed. We have to move on. Yes, there may not be the infrastructure in place, but I think what one should do would be to agitate and to see that those are made available. But not to say that individual lecturers should not participate or may be part of the process. I think that is wrong. It is a negative way of approaching a situation which is really very, very serious and the new normal. Now, having said that, I think you pointed out at the unique problem that, yes, the new normal indicates that those who can afford are having education in the comfort of their homes, even if it is not in the normal schools setting where children get socialized and also do other things. But I think the new normal should dictate now that we do take that into account, and that when we provide infrastructure for public schools, because now what is happening really is with the private schools, and that they are able to do so, and parents who can send their children to school also are able to buy the hardware and also to pay for the bandwidth to use it. Now, the new normal, therefore, will require state authorities who provide public education to take that into account, and therefore pay more attention to distance learning, because this thing has happened, and you don't know where else it will come and how else it will happen in our society. But it's a pity that parents, children whose social and economic status is very low would be shortchanged. That is a fact. This is where now the public educators come into account, that we have to build something to take care of those their needs.
Certainly, Professor. And also, I'd like to ask you, how would you analyze the response of the Northern Governors to the COVID-19 outbreak in Nigeria? I mean, most recently, a lot of Northern Governors have come under criticism for the easing of the lockdown for Eid al-Fitr celebrations. And of course, the governor of Kano State has been under particular criticism for weeks with regards to the way he has handled the COVID-19 outbreak in his state. What would your analysis be?
My attitude always is that we should disaggregate things. Don't talk about northern governors. I think you should. People have different approaches. There is no single common approach by.
But they do discuss their approaches through the Northern Governors Forum, and they do try and come up with agreements through that.
Well, if they do, Kaduna State will not be doing what it is doing, or Plateau will not do what they are doing. And I don't think that is a position taken by Northern Governors except if you're referring to the Almajiri system. I think that's the only thing. But in terms of how to handle the pandemic happening in their states, I think it is entirely individual state affairs, and that states can take decisions based on the assessment of the condition in their state, and that's what has happened. Now, have regard to your observation about the Kano state governor. It is a very, very difficult decision. It's a very, very difficult situation. Apparently, the state, as with other states, was ill prepared to face the pandemic, and it took them time to come to terms with it, and that perhaps they are doing their best at the moment. One curious thing you might want to know is that right now, you may have noticed that there are so few numbers coming out of Kano, new numbers of people who have tested positive. Of course, this is not for want of the testing. I think the testing facilities have vastly been increased. We do not hear actually the numbers of tests conducted as against the number of positives that have been reported. Now, the other thing actually is that the people are not going for the testing. And this thing has gone into the community, and we have to be creative, the state and the private individuals. I am part of a private initiative, the Kano Against COVID initiative. We're doing as much as we can to reach out to the communities, to communicate, to get people to come to test, because if people don't come to test, there is no way the numbers will ramp up, because you cannot just grab people in the street and take a swab of their throat and then submit a result. I think the community has to also be part of the. It is not the government alone. The government may make the facilities available, may persuade, may provide palliatives, but I think if the community does not also take part in the process, you would not see the numbers. If there are the numbers there, because we are all suspecting that the number should be much higher than what is being reported. If they don't go for testing, you can't know.
Well, Professor Yadudu, we have less than 2 minutes to go, but we would like to take your thoughts on Nigeria's journey from 1999 to this moment, and what you think of President Buhari's 5 years in office.
I thought this is about COVID and not about politics. We've had 21 years, is it 21 years of uninterrupted civilian rule?
That's true.
Under our constitutional system. And I think it is a good thing that has happened. I think there is much to improve in very many other areas. It is always tempting to roll out either drums of praises or maybe of condemnation. I haven't given thought to the different areas where one may apportion blame or maybe praise in what has happened so far. But I think we should take heart that we have been trying this system for 2 decades and plus, and we should perfect it, we should improve on it, and it is best for us, and also it is best for the system. Once you have democratic system in place, and when people have choices to make, things that are not happening well today may be the reason why a regime or a governor or an official.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Yadudu. That's all we'll be able to take.